السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. باسم المركز الوطني للتعليم الإلكتروني نرحب بكل من انضم معنا في ورشة تحديد المهارات وتخطيطها. وأسعد أنا زيد بن علي الرقيب بتقديم هذه الورشة، والتي تأتي ضمن برنامج المؤتمر الدولي التعليم الإلكتروني لتنمية القدرات البشرية، الذي ينظمه المركز خلال الفترة بين 24 وحتى 27 من الشهر الحالي. الترجمة الفورية متوفرة باللغة العربية لهذه الورشة. الرجاء الضغط على أيقونة الترجمة Interpretation في أسفل الشاشة الآن. إذا كان لديكم أسئلة يمكنكم وضعها في الدردشة سواء باللغة العربية أو الإنجليزية، وسيتم الرد على أسئلتكم في نهاية الورشة.
Answer all of them by the end of this workshop. It is important that you fill the form to get the attendance certificate. التي بعنوان تحديد المهارات وتخطيطها. أنا اسمي علي الرقيب. ورشة العمل اليوم سوف يتم عقدها من المنظمين.
Hi, this is Kishore Kumar Singh. I think let's not delay and start straight away the proceedings. I work as a senior skills specialist at Regional Office of Arab States. Over.
So without further ado then, thank you very much, Kishore. I will now share the screen to show my presentation. Just give me a second for that. I hope you see it. So my name is Olga Striyetska-Elina. I'm coming from the International Labour Office headquarters in Geneva, where I lead a team in our skills and employability branch of the Employment Policy Department. So my team is dealing with skill strategies for future labor markets. So one of the core topics we're dealing with is skill needs anticipation and matching. And this is also the subject of our today's workshop. We prepared several presentations for you. You can treat this as a teaser, as an introduction to the subject of skill needs anticipation and matching. We have actually the full course, face-to-face course, which takes 1 week on skill needs anticipation and matching, and then another week on a specific tool we use at sectoral level, skills for trade and economic diversification. Or we have also a number of online courses of different lengths, sometimes also tailored to specific demands of national stakeholders. So first of all, why do we need actually to anticipate skill needs? Of course, you all have heard about different so-called drivers of change, or the megatrends, global megatrends that shape the situation on the labor market, that put really these big questions which you have in the cloud on the left-hand side. Which jobs will be required in the future? What kind of tasks they will include, and what does it mean in terms of skills and qualification needs? And these drivers of change, some of them I mentioned here, such as migration or increased mobility of labor. That of course increases also overall competitiveness for jobs and among skills on a global scale. And that also makes actually the task itself of skill needs anticipation quite demanding, quite challenging at the same time, because we in a way have to also anticipate locally, nationally, but also think globally what kind of requirements for skills appear in the world. Climate change, so my colleague Hee Kyung will say a few words about the results of research we did, and how climate change agenda and the whole greening transition agenda shapes demand for jobs and skills. globalization and trade that, of course, creates a lot of jobs, but also creates more competitiveness. And in order to be able to benefit from trade and from the jobs created, eventually we encounter the situation that higher level of skills are required at national level. And now trade itself is actually in crisis globally, so there have been some changes within the trade patterns themselves, and that also has the impact on the labor market, on jobs and skills requirements. Demography, a lot of advanced countries experience aging of societies where the labor force is shrinking. At the same time, some countries are still in quite beneficial situation. So there is this also has the linkage to migration and mobility of labor. Of course, now those countries that do not have enough local national labor force, they attract a lot of labor force from abroad. That is also the case of the Saudi Arabia, and that also increases the challenges, because when we speak about the labor market and the needs on the labor market, I think the big question would be for your country, what are we talking about, national workforce, or is it also the workforce for those incoming labor migrants? And then finally, digitalization and technological change. And this is, of course, a driver of change of which you heard a lot. It's a quite medialized subject at the moment. And it's mostly medialized because there is a big discussion about how jobs may be taken, replaced by technology. But in fact, what we know about this driver of change, of course, some jobs will be replaced, but due to digitalization, technological change, also a lot of jobs are being created in the value chain, indirect jobs, as well as induced jobs. So those jobs which are created out of profits which are created also by companies. So therefore, the overall impact on the labor market might not be actually negative, it may be positive. However, the transition itself may be quite painful. And we also have to bear in mind that we estimate that more than a third of all jobs due to digitalization are going to change in nature. That means the composition of tasks and skills per occupation will be different. So in addition to all of that, you would like to introduce a technical vocational education training, TVET, that's the acronym we use, program, and you enroll a certain number of graduates for that program. You know that actually already in 1 year, the demand in terms of numbers, but also in terms of composition of skills for this program may change. And by the time of graduation, the change actually might be very different in terms of both quantity and quality of those graduates. In addition to that, also preparation of elaboration of the training programs themselves, competency standards, the whole approval process when it comes to the legal side of the of education provision also takes time, and therefore it creates the additional delay in the delivery of skills, and therefore we need to know in advance what kind of skills will be needed for this and that program, and also in terms of numbers, which program is better to offer. Now, in terms of, in terms of definitions, what is skill needs anticipation? There are very many terms which are used as synonyms. Very often you hear forecasting. So when we say forecasting, we actually mean quantitative skill needs anticipation, which is based on modeling. So that's why we use this term, which is more general, skill needs anticipation, which is basically a forward-looking activity to assess skill needs on the labor market. What is important for us that it's done really in a strategic way, that we use consistent, systematic methods. So it's not really a one-off exercise. Very often there will be, and I'm sure this is also the case in your country, there may be plenty of efforts here and there by different ministries, think tanks, universities to implement a survey of skill needs in a certain sector or in a number of companies. But they do not speak to each other. They are not discussed by stakeholders. Their results are not implemented, and they do not complement each other. So there is no higher level institution that would take the results of different efforts and put that into some kind of a strategic document, making sure that we really learn as much as possible across sectors at national level, and also go to the local level where it is needed. And we learn also about different aspects of skills needs. So that is why we need really strategic, consistent, systematic, sustainable way of skill needs anticipation that all requires a system which would allow us to anticipate skills in a kind of continuous way, using different tools, different data, but also interpreting that data, making sense of that data to the policy level, translating that into a strategy. And that is only possible with the help of social partners. That means representatives of the private sector, employers, as well as trade unions, workers, who have to discuss also the results and translate that into kind of action policy measures. So I already mentioned the global drivers of change. And I think the important element to mention is that these drivers of change, of course, they influence demand for skills. They also influence supply of skills. And that is what increases the mismatch between demand and supply. Mismatch in terms of skills demanded on the labor market and those offered by people, workforce, but also mismatch within workforce already on the labor market in employment, because very often there are skill gaps which are identified by employers and workers themselves as well. In order to minimize that mismatch, of course, we need to anticipate skill needs, but also we need to think that this skill needs anticipation inform very different policies. And that policy can be undertaken on the demand side, but also on the supply side. So of course, on the supply side, you can think about national and sectoral education training policies and regulations. Different types of strategy, including lifelong learning strategy or work-based learning, apprenticeship training. You may think about certain activation measures, especially that concerns the activation of certain age groups, for example, older workers, or in Saudi Arabia, it might be also women, or broader, in a broader sense, national workforce, how to activate them and make them participate more actively in labor force, in work. Skilled migration and workforce mobility policy as well can be informed. And finally, an all skills matching and retraining policy, which is usually done through public employment services. But also on the skills demand side, there are a variety of measures that can be implemented, because a lot of skills are not used. You will see them, we have collected a little bit of just like a couple of indicators to show to you that there is actually a big mismatch in terms of overqualification in Saudi Arabia. And then that skills are not utilized to their full potential. So people work, they have a job, but then their potential in terms of the qualification they have, the level of qualification is not fully utilized, and therefore there is some room for improvement in terms of policy on the skill needs on the skills utilization side. Further, now measures to improve retention, and that also has something to do with the pay, with the working condition, because often we need people, and we hear complaints about really not enough skills or not enough skilled workers applying to this and that job. But then eventually, if you go really into the more detailed level of analysis, you realize that it's actually the problem is that the working conditions are not really very good. And then business strategies which are based on capabilities of and human capital investment rather than low wages, low skill kind of equilibrium, and national sectoral policies and regulations. Now, in terms of the policy cycle, skill needs assessment and anticipation is quite important, because that part of the policy cycle, that element informs skills development policy, curriculum design, competency standards, before you actually go into the actual skills development, skills delivery, training. In the ideal system, that training then is monitored, evaluated, and that results of evaluation also inform back the system of skill needs anticipation. So this is a kind of a virtual cycle that makes the system working in the continuous improvement way. And that's how it should be normally. Now, another important point I would like to make is that skill needs anticipation is a big part of labor market information system. And as a system, labor market information is based on 4 pillars. You see them here on the left side. Of course, you need very good data. But if you have data which is not analyzed, which is not stored adequately, which is not really exchanged, discussed, and analyzed and taken on board adequately, then data is useless. Therefore, we need good methods, we need good tools, we need analytical capacities in institutions to be able to process all that data collected. And finally, what is the most important, we need institutional platforms that ensure that social dialogue, the exchange of views with direct actors of the labor market, employers, workers, on key elements, key concerns of the situation on the labor market, and also being informed by data collected. So what are these institutions? I just collected a little bit of examples here at national level. This could be councils, so commissions like an Employment and Skills Council, Human Resource Development Council. They're usually tripartite. That means they represent employers, workers, government, and education and training side as well. Sometimes line ministries if they're actively involved in the education and training provision. For some policies, countries form interministerial committees for the implementation of specific policies or task forces, working groups. Sometimes we see examples of national employment training, or sometimes it's called human resource development boards. Again, national boards that take the responsibility for the conceptualization and implementation of training, and therefore also they take the charge for skill needs anticipation. Some countries have sort of softer approaches, such as expert groups in Ireland. Or networks or national observatories in France, and networks such as Frequenz network in Germany. Also, many countries are more sort of decentralized. They rely really on their sectoral level institutions and sectoral level data collection, but they still need coordination at national level. So for this purpose, for example, in the UK, there is an alliance of sectoral skills council that actually takes care of this coordination, and also some questions which are important for skill needs anticipation that go beyond sectoral level. At industry level, so there are a lot of examples of sectoral skills bodies, sectoral skills councils, and you see the countries which I mentioned here. There are quite many advanced countries, middle income countries, but even developing countries. Really, sectoral skills bodies become very, very, very fashionable, because this is the level where you can really establish a very effective social dialogue, where really the signals from the labor market can be captured in the best way, and where you can actually also implement research at a quite granular level, going to the level of detail. So for example, in South Africa, SETAs, Skills Education Training Authorities, they look at some skill shortages, specific skill gaps, and they have the whole range of specific indicators for which they collect data through sectoral at a sectoral level on critical skills, for example, and then this all is compiled at national level for some kind of labor market information system at national level. It doesn't matter really whether the system is more centralized or decentralized. We see very good examples of both. And what is it really important, that the different elements are combined and perspectives are combined, they are complemented to each other. So you, of course, need some research at occupational level in order to be able to update qualifications. You need some research at sectoral level also to understand where sector is going in terms of competitiveness strategy, trade, and even diversification of markets, products. You need some research also at the company level to make sure that that also interests of employees are taken on board, and so on and so on. So what is important is really to make sure that all these different elements complement each other, and this information is shared to some kind of a higher level for the this comprehensive analysis. So what we need really holistic system, which is very well coordinated. So coordination is a key. This is number one thing. And then coordinated also including coordination with the private sector. That means also relying very much on social dialogue and the system which is sustainable, because you can think about something humongous, but then eventually what I see very often in countries that there are mushrooming of new institutions, and new question arises, okay, let's create a new institution. No, we don't need that. We need really to look at what institutions are already doing and think how they can take part of responsibility in making sure that they take care of the collection of certain type of data, analysis of certain type of data, how they complement and how they contribute towards the system, how they participate in discussions. So it's rather really taking the charge, committing to certain output rather than creating new institutions every time we have a new question. In terms of methods, it's again, it's just a teaser because we have the whole module on methods. So it's just to say, what type of method would really correspond to purpose. So if you would like to do, for example, to formulate policy at the national level, or to say something about rough allocation of resources to this or that field of studies, you can implement something at fairly high level, quantitative model-based forecast. But that kind of forecast requires a lot of data, is quite data hungry, as we say. So really data and also long time series, uninterrupted and quite robust. So if we don't have such data and we still would like to have some kind of high policy level information to make sure that the policies are informed, we can go for more qualitative approaches such as foresights, which is more it can still use the information from forecast, but it's in principle is a qualitative tool. It's very interactive. It already includes the representatives of businesses, of the private sector, and discusses with them what will be the challenges of the future. What, for example, how the technology will shape certain sector, what kind of jobs and tasks will be required there, and what it means in terms of skills demand. And then they can discuss right there and decide collectively what it means in terms of programs, what has to be done. So we call this a little bit like a shared diagnosis, when all parties really commit to the result already. So at sectoral level, of course, you can use a variety of approaches. You can actually also include their foresights, surveys, scenarios, quantitative modeling. We have some ILO approaches, which will be presented then by my colleagues later, a little bit in the workshop. What is important about sectoral approach is that this is the level where you can really go to a granular level of detail. So if you would like to inform counseling and guidance, career guidance, which is a very important element of the system. If you would like to inform qualification standards, competency standards, this is the level to implement the research. Serving among employers, so how we call them establishment skill service, is quite a universal tool and can be useful for the variety of policies. Can also inform the updating of training programs and curricula, or for example, the delivery of retraining through public employment services. Tracer Studies is a tool that actually provides information about the quality of the programs that people have gone through. So the graduates usually report on the results of the training program in terms of their employability, how successful they are in their employment, how satisfied they are with the knowledge they received, what are the skills gaps, and that information can then feed also the conceptualization of curriculum development and then updating of education and training. And finally, the new approach, which I'm sure you heard of, big data, real-time data, is quite promising because it really relies on online job vacancies and the information which is already there. So you don't really need to implement an additional survey. You just, collect the information which is already posted on the internet. But there are many issues with robustness of that data, with duplication, with coverage when it comes especially to blue-collar workers, and also to certain countries or regions and sectors. So there are issues, but it's certainly a tool which has very high potential in the future. And finally, to mention just some tools which we use in the ILO. So we have a package of generic tools that look at the use of labor market information, specific indicators on how to implement forecasts, foresights, what can be done at the sectoral level, establishment skill service, tracer studies, and also the approaches that may be used by employment service providers. So this is the package which we implemented together with our European partners, the European Training Foundation and the Center for the Development of Vocation Training, CDFOP. And the guidance note that basically guides you through where to use which approach. We also have some more specific tools. Well, here it's still quite general, but already targeting a specific policy, employment policies, for what kind of skills information can inform that policy and how to collect that, what kind of data. And here you see some examples of research and some other knowledge products. And then we have a family of tools that are more specific for very specific policies. So for example, now STED, Skills for Trade and Economic Diversification, which is basically a sectoral based tool. And my colleague Bolorma will give you a presentation. We have a new tool which actually implements also the assessment of skill needs for retraining, reskilling, upskilling purposes during the COVID-19, which is mostly implemented online because we all experienced the same problem that we couldn't really implement anything face-to-face. Skills technology foresight, that's something I already mentioned before as an example, and a family of tools on skills for a greener future. So how to identify and also some research results on future skill needs for the green transition. And my colleague Hei Kyang will tell you a little bit more about that. So that's just, the introduction. And then you will hear indicators, what can be done at sectoral level, and a little bit on STED, a little bit on skills with the digitalization and the green transition. And finally, at the end, we'll discuss just a little bit about how you can translate into policy and practice and what we mean by that. So I'll stop sharing here. And I think if there are questions, perhaps that's the time to ask them. If not, we can just switch to the next presentation. I see there are some questions in Q&A, but they appear in Arabic, so I will need actually our partners to translate them for me. Mr. Zaid, perhaps you can help us. If not, we can also leave questions until the end, and then we can just continue with the presentation on data, on skills supply, demand, and mismatch. Anna, would you like to start?
Yes, thank you very much, Olga. Yes, if there are no questions to the presentation, I can start and I will share the screen. Let me just find here the presentation, share. So can you see my screen?
And we can see your screen, and please remember to introduce yourself.
Yes, yes, of course. Now, I just wanted to make sure that the screen is open. So thank you very much, Olga. So my name is Anna Pojanin, and I'm going to co-present this part on data and indicators with my colleague Lucas Ng, who is also today with us. And as you can see from the title, we are just going to give a brief introduction on the data and present some indicators related to skills anticipation. So as you have already seen from the previous presentation, as in any kind of market in economics, we're trying to find the balance between the demand and the supply side. So it's the same in the labor market and the same in the market for skills. What is important is to understand really what is behind the terms skill supply, skills demand, and the skills mismatch. So on the supply side, we have the workers. So the skills that are actually held by the workers. So we can distinguish between two core concepts. So first we have the stock, which is the skills possessed currently by the labor force. So what is actually available on the labor market. And then we have the flows, which is the skills that are like the people that are entering the labor market and those that are exiting the labor market. And so it's really more this dynamic process that is being analyzed when looking at the flows. For capturing information on the skills supply, we need data on population, on enrollments, how many people are attending given educational cycles, how many people graduated from educational programs, and also information on job seekers is very precious for this analysis. On the demand side, so the other side of the balance, we have the employers, let's say, and so what are the skills that are needed in the labor market? And this can be influenced, the demand side, so the skills required by the labor market can be influenced by, for example, by economic expansion. So if there is an economic growth, the demand for a certain type of skills can increase. Or, for example, the replacement demand. So when certain people leave the labor market, for example, when certain workers go into retirement, those workers need to be replaced, and therefore this impacts on the demand. In order to capture information on the demand side, data on the employment structure, so the employment by economic sector, or by the occupation or the level of education can be very helpful. What is also very useful and more used nowadays is information on job vacancies. So the job openings that can provide us really precise information on the actual skills demanded. And then also information on the relation between the jobs and the actual composition of the tasks that are associated to those jobs, and so the skills that are required. In the middle, we see the mismatch. And what is also, in order to proceed with the mismatch analysis, it's important to understand that the mismatch is a multifaceted problem. So there is not only one type of mismatch, but different type of mismatches. And for capturing information on the mismatches, we can look into information on the unemployment, one of the most popular indicators on imbalance. What are the shortages on the labor market, where are the gaps, or where are people over or under educated? So to introduce the topics, the over and under education is basically the vertical mismatch. So we have people that have a certain level of education, but then they are either educated above or below the actual requirement. On the other hand, there is the horizontal mismatch. So people have the like this adequate level, but maybe not the adequate field. And then, you know, we could go for each of these types into detail, but these are the two core concepts I want to introduce. And also what is important is skills obsolescence. So we need to see it as a dynamic process. Skills that are required today may not be required late in 20 years time due to the changes in the requirements in the labor market, such as technological change. So how to measure a skill? How do we identify the skills? Well, there are different approaches. We can either proceed to certain tests, or like what is given the difficulties in capturing very precise information on the actual skills requirements, we proceed to so-called proxies. We proceed to so-called proxies. So it's basically we try to get an idea on what are the skills behind by analyzing the occupations that are the movements in the occupational structure, the jobs that are being required, the qualification level, and so on and so on. And also what can help is to do cross-tabulation, so to look really like within a certain sector, what are the occupations required, or here as noted matrices. Yes. So we talk about the data, but what are the main data sources that we use? This is just at a glance, the most important sources. So the most popular one that we use are labor force surveys, which are run in the vast majority of countries in the world. These provide really very rich information, and ideally they are run on a regular basis. So they allow to analyze an evolution over time. They allow also to have information by gender, by age groups, by education. So really to go more into depth. And their big advantage is that compared to other sources, they really cover in most cases the whole economy. So it's in particular for both the formal and the informal economy. However, as for all surveys, it's a very costly exercise, which is something that needs to be taken into account, and it's usually a restriction for the regularity of the survey itself. The other important survey kind of source are enterprise surveys, which, so as the term says, analyzes the skills requirements by questioning enterprises and representatives of enterprises. One of the big restrictions of these sources is that usually the informal sector is not being captured along, and is, as well as any kind of survey, a very costly exercise. However, we really get the first-hand information on the skills needs, and which is why it's a very useful resource. Administrative data, any kind of administrative data can be used also for analyzing analyzing the skills requirements, and here the cost efficiency, for example, is related to the fact that we don't have to collect new data. Public employment service registries. So we can go again into the dynamics of what are the vacancies. So when employers, for example, apply to public employment services, what kind of jobs are they offering? And also we have information on the people that are registering there, the job seekers, and thereby by analyzing the two sides, we can go into the depth of the mismatch that exists on the labor market. However, it may suffer from biases because not all employers register with public employment services, and neither it is the case for all job seekers. Real-time big data, which was mentioned by Olga before, a very popular source of data, which allows to capture the information already available online on job platforms. It has the huge advantage of offering the actual skills requirements associated to job openings. So it's really rich in information, very granular information. However, it suffers from it may suffer from a strong bias because not all jobs are being posted online and not all sectors are being well represented. And also, not all skills may actually be noted down. So there are other strong limitations that are associated to this source, as it is the case for any kind of sources you have seen. And then there is a number of other sources that we cannot go into depth, such as sectoral studies that are going to be presented by my colleague, or tracer studies, so studies, surveys among graduates, and so on and so on. And then to finish this part on the sources, who is actually in charge of collecting data? Well, for LFS, for labor force surveys or census data, really the main body in a country is normally the National Statistical Office. Otherwise, important players are ministries as well, such as the Ministry of Labor or the Ministry of Education, public employment services that are already mentioned, research institutions such as universities or research centers, and web providers, for example, in the case of online vacancies, and a number of other actors. So the list is not exhaustive. And to pass to the next session. So just to illustrate a bit the analysis of imbalances using labor market indicators, using the classic here, the unemployment rate, which was calculated using the labor force survey from Saudi Arabia, and the unemployment definition of the ILO, which is people in unemployment are considered as people that are not working, that are actively seeking a job, that are available to work. And here, for example, using this indicator, we can already see, and using a broad disaggregation by age groups, we can see that the incidence of unemployment is much higher among young people than among the so-called adult population, so everyone who is age 25 or more, and that among both age groups, proportionately, there is a higher incidence of unemployment among people with a higher level of education. The second graph considers the entire working age population, so 15 or more, but a disaggregation among men and women. And we can see that there is a difference between men and women in terms of unemployment, and the incidence is much higher among highly educated women. And there has been also a slight increase in terms of unemployment among women after the outbreak of COVID-19. And then another indicator I would like to present is the mismatch. So as I introduced to you, the over-education and the under-education, there is a much higher incidence of under-education proportionately than over-education. However, when we look at the time series, so far there is no visible impact related after the outbreak of the COVID-19. It would be interesting to analyze also the 2021 data, which unfortunately has not been available to us for the moment. And now I would like to give the floor to my colleague Lucas that I introduced before to introduce our current work on the ILO Skills for Jobs indicator.
Thank you, Anna. Hi, I'm Lucas, Technical Officer with the ILO. So we are in the midst of preparing for the launch of the ILO Skills for Job Visualization tool, which extends the methodological approach by the OECD to non-OECD countries. So this allows users to explore the evolutions of occupations and skills mismatches by country and occupation groups. Now, the data is obtained from the ILO harmonized microdata collection, which includes survey microdata from over 150 countries that are systematically processed in accordance with the standards established by the International Conference of Labour Statisticians. Now, data on skills, as you can see, is actually obtained from ONET. So this is actually an occupation taxonomy based on occupational content of jobs in the labour market in the US. So we hope that, to sum it up, with the launch of this tool, existing skills matches could be identified and corrected through better education and training, planning, development of skill policies, as well as through promotion of lifelong learning. Also, we hope that the findings generates interest among key stakeholders of various countries, opening up more opportunities for social dialogue on the importance of skill needs anticipation. So this is just a brief overview, but once the tool is launched, definitely do feel free to check it out. So I'll now hand over the time to my next colleague, Paloma, for her presentation on the sectoral approach, sectoral studies. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucas. Lucas, can you close the presentation?
Yes, it's on my screen.
Okay,
I was sharing the presentation. And yes, I would like to give the floor to my colleague because I was just informed that the Q&A will be at the end.
Hello. Do you see my screen?
Yeah, we can see your screen, Paloma.
Great. Hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Paloma Tomrich-Clark. I am a technical specialist and working also in the work area skills strategies for future labor markets. Mainly, I am responsible for providing technical backstopping to projects which are applying ILO's STAT methodology. STAT stands for Skills for Trade and Economic Diversification. So following the presentation of my colleagues, I would like to present about, the STAT methodology. STAT methodology, STAT approaches, it's really like practical and sectoral approach to skills anticipation, to skills development. And before talking about STAT, I would like to say a few words to complement what Olga said about earlier. Why do we need to work at the sector level, right? Even though we all know that skills are really important for future success of trade or economic growth. Often all these national strategies, they are not really concrete when we would like to develop interventions or actionable measures on skills. So we really need to go drill down at the granular level, and this is like sector level. Why? Because sector is really crucial to understand the key drivers of change in the skills demand for that sector, for instance. And also when we're working at the sector level, not at the national level, we have really clear number of stakeholders with whom we can really work together. It facilitates the coordination, collaboration, and dialogue between stakeholders, and also reduce the complexity and the scope of intervention. And also by working at the sector level, it allows us to go in deeper inside and in understanding the skills needs in the strategically important sectors as well. And then also we can easily link to industrial policies, investment decisions. And then also another advantage is that by working at the sector level with really working with the stakeholders, we are not really reliant on data availability. So we could use also a lot of qualitative approaches as well. So STAT is an approach that really trying to, we work, at ILO through the STAT program to really help countries to, to integrate skills development policies into policies of demand side. So basically it is really a combination of a strategic analysis with the social dialogue, meaning that really holistic approach, a strategic focus on skills. So far we've been, since its launch in 2010, we've been working now over 20 countries in 40 sectors. And each time we do work in sometimes in 2 sectors in parallel. The latest work we are, currently we're working is in Algeria, Morocco, Tunisia, and as well as in Malaysia in 2 sectors, for instance, food processing and construction sectors. And recently also we worked in Bosnia and Herzegovina in IT sector. So what is distinctive about STAT? Because usually, the STAT is really focusing on sectors that that are exposed to international competition, right? Mainly the export sectors or input competence sectors. Why? Because usually those sectors, they are really exposed to international competition, and they tend to have higher skills. They tend to more willing to work, improve their skills needs to the of the labor market, right? But also not only them, but also the important sectors, they do need to really have to understand the skills and implications so that they can really actively participate in the global value chain as well. At the same time, sector is really the effective level for analyzing, anticipating skills needs, but also not only for that, but also for taking actions on those to address those needs. And often at the sector level, the companies, they do have similar skills needs, and they do employ similar occupations, and then also education training providers, they provide the same education training providers, they provide the skills. To a great extent also, the companies, they use similar technologies, also they do employ similar forms of work organization. So therefore it really makes the sector levels really effective level to work. And also being ILO, having this tripartite approach, and we really can combine, the sector approach to the skills with the industrial and trade perspective, and then bring in also the social dialogue, through social dialogue, employers and workers actively in the process. What is the development logic is that usually developing the right skills for the sector will improve strengthen the business capabilities of the target sectors, and therefore it will improve the productivity and then also market competitiveness, and therefore it will lead to more sales in traded markets and more employment in decent jobs. But this is really the direct impact. But indirectly, we really see, in the ILO, we really do more focusing on the process. So by focusing on the process, working with the stakeholders, through scaling, institutionalizing, maturing the skills governance through a number of activities, for instance, like a public-private institutional arrangement for skills governance, like the sector skills councils, or maybe also working on improving the capacity in skills analysis and anticipation of the stakeholders. And also once we have also some recommendations into addressing those skills needed that are identified through the process, there will be more collaboration between stakeholders, such as companies with education training providers. So it is really exercise multi-stakeholder, public and private governance of the process, and then starting from sector selection and then analyzing the skills needs and mobilizing implementation of those recommendations that comes out of this whole process. The approach has 3 phases. So we start with the startup phase, where we really selected sectors, and then goes into the diagnostic phase, where we really basically the main outcome of this the phase is that really developing or coming up with the sector skills strategies that are really shared by the stakeholders. And then the last phase is really implementing these recommendations which comes out of this strategy. And throughout this process, we really work with the stakeholders on the project governance or capacity building or institutionalizing skills needs anticipation, this process. If you look a bit closer at how it works, like for instance, at the startup phase, we really work with the national stakeholders as well as the sector stakeholders to select which sector we will be focusing. Once we know that the focus of the sector, then we start the diagnostic phase. Diagnostic phase is really trying to understand the opportunity challenges that the sector has, and through how do we do that? We're really doing combination of different approaches that Olga and Anna mentioned earlier, that we use whatever available in the country, as well as if there are any data gap, then we will also use the survey of employers on the skills. And then also at the same time, we do the skill supply side analysis. So basically, we're really trying to understand the both skill demand and supply side and putting them together and then trying to have a good perspective, good analysis of skills needs. And so this information brought to the technical and policy workshop, and then where we get really stakeholders to provide comments, and then they really develop this shared understanding about the skills needs that were identified throughout the process. And then they will be also working together to prioritize which ones needs to be addressed and what should be the main measures to address those. So that will be the implementation phase. At the ILO, we do have also this is the full state approach. We also have a rapid state, which means that sometimes undertaking survey takes longer period. So therefore, we do, instead of survey, we also do rapid state, where we really replace the survey with the 2-3 full days of workshop with the stakeholders, going through this diagnostic phase with them together in person. But now, because of COVID-19, we've been doing this online with the stakeholders, but 3 days in like a three half days workshop, which also works well. The key here is that really this technical, the rapid technical and policy workshop, that workshop to be successful, we really need to have at least 1/3 the representatives from the companies, because they really know what are the skills needs, what are the implications on the skills, right? So in terms of the diagnostic framework, is really like, once we select the sector, we really trying to understand trying to characterize the sector, and also not only the characterizing the sector in quantitative and qualitative terms, but also we're trying to understand the business environment in which the sector is functioning, because we really have to understand that, so that we have
raise awareness about life on money that refers to improve their transferability across occupations and sectors. The approach begins with the rights and the rights and the most are documents right and the first of those are what we call from that right that's right there with us like into the first to that so that all of the however the most by the most scenarios. Under sustainability value, there are regions that have different high level of regions as you see here, building resources, different and this implies process development that can be this implies that focus on reskilling and adoption of workers with retraining. We need this that they can adapt into new sector contexts. There we are based on regions, there's versus and our regions have a range of functions to be adjusted to circle they invite us to focus on reskilling, for identity, and also production measures. So now it comes to what questions. So what skills we need in this transition? Of course, we need a good foundation and core beliefs. How do we influence all these decisions? What beliefs is part of the so you can work on what you learn. So this is also part of the so you can do it. Investment in reading is crucial so workers can become relevant skills for the training. I mean, there's still powerful you can our website, which is really relevant. Thank you for listening, and I will hand over to Gabby. Implementation of it, so the analysis of the implementation of regulations, share, discuss, communities of different institutions that are all part of the work. Not able to be the market, but it's important to also be to info that policy and choices as well as the handshake. Some of that also able for them also